Ledger is a writing podcast and a steadfast defender of keeping the dog in. My name's Austin Wilson. Welcome to today's show, where I am chatting with debut novelist Joe Bond, whose novel Hope House is out today, May 26th, 2026, from Hub City Press. He stopped by Ledger to talk about the genesis of this novel from a short story, an award-winning short story that he wrote, about how he felt like he was writing about the wrong stuff before he started writing this novel, and how he figured out what the right stuff was, and how that's connected to his becoming a father. But we also talk about some of the topics you're used to hearing about. Does he write every day and those kinds of things? But we also talk about leaving the dog in the novel and not cutting the dog out, but so much more, including a thing that's very dear to my heart, feedback, and the value that it had for him and helping define him as a writer, but also outside support and belief. Fantastic conversation. Very happy Joe got to stop by. Had a lot of fun. We got some laughs in there as well, which is always good. Make sure you go to joebondwriter.com. Check out his stuff. You can buy his book on bookshop.org through the Mosshart Books affiliate link in the show notes if you want to support the show. He has an amazing essay in the Paris Review, which is also linked in the show notes, and an essay on LitHub, one of my favorite websites, that went up today as the novel came out, so make sure you check that out as well. It is 5 Things I Got Wrong in My First Novel, according to my dad, which we do talk about his dad in this as well, because his dad worked in the boys' homes that he writes about in his novel. Very, very interesting book, super great. Definitely should pick it up if you want to feel a lot of things, have some laughs, but also, learn more about yourself and the human condition. It's a good book, and I really recommend it to anyone out there. As for my stuff, go to austinrwilson.com. Check out my work. You can also go to Substack to check out my short fiction, substack.com/AustinRWilson. I published 2 stories in April, 1 in May, with more coming. I have one coming out in a zine here pretty soon, a sort of science fantasy story that I've been thinking about for a while. Watch out for an announcement for that. And I am recording another interview 2 days from me recording this very intro, so keep your eyes open for that as well. But as for now, this is my chat with Joe Bond, debut novelist of Hope House. Debut novel, and I would love to know what that feels like. For people out there who don't know, tell me what you are going through right now, having your book just come out.
A little bit surreal.
Yeah.
It was something I worked on for several years. And I think I used to tell myself I would just be happy to write a book, to have a book, like have it in your hand.
Yeah.
But now that I've actually done it, it turns out that I really want people to read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want people to connect to it and meet the characters and get to know the kids I wrote about.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that a little bit, I guess, about expectations versus reality, for having a thing in your head for so long and going through the process of making it a thing. Tell me about what it felt like kind of the day the book came out. I mean, I know what it's when you feel, you're opening a box and it has your book in it, and you're sort of seeing this thing. And I do think writers have this maybe not unknown, but maybe unspoken sometimes desire to see the thing become a real thing, even in the age of digital books. So talk to me a little bit about that, about how you've traveled, I guess, so far from going to like wanting the thing to be real to seeing it be real. Like the surreal aspect of it, which you mentioned already, is obviously in your mind, but has it changed how you felt about what you're going to be doing from now on?
It was just such a gradual process.
Yeah.
Where, I started working, I think started as a story around 2018. I probably started drafting like the first story. And that was honestly, when the story got published, that was probably the most exciting part for me, because that's when the process sped up. Like it won like an award, and I signed with an agent, and all of a sudden, I'd really been trying to write something for almost a decade, like writing stories and with a little bit of success, but not much, tons of rejection. And when I felt like I was writing about the wrong stuff too. And I kind of found like what I needed to be writing about. And I felt things come together. And that part was, to me, the most exciting because it became like the possibility became very real. And all I had to do after that was like write for another 6 years or something.
That's easy.
And so the process is drawn out, but it had, it's ups and downs where you're sending in drafts and you're getting notes back, and you're waiting a lot. At least that's how it worked for me.
Yeah.
And to finally sign with a publisher and to get an advance copy of your book, to the process of picking out a cover, it's something that everyone who toils for years, I hope they get to go through that process because it was really cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious then about saying you felt like you're writing about the wrong stuff.
Hmm.
Like when do you think you came to that realization, and I guess why, but also what were you writing about?
Probably like a lot of writers, I was doing imitations of my favorites,
Yeah.
for years. Like I love Dennis Johnson, and I think most of us that read him kind of were cast under his spell. And I love Richard Ford and the voice in his books,
Yeah.
um, like Rock Springs and Canada and books like that. And there was something there that I really connected with. But when I would go to write my stories, the sort of magic wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I love the voice. And then I had a son, I had a child, and I became a father. And I started thinking about the kids I'd grown up around. My dad ran group homes, and I'd grown up around teenagers who'd been in trouble and had really difficult lives, and I'd never thought to write about them. I'd never thought um, about that world, putting that world down on the page, even though I knew it really well. And when I became a dad and just being a father, it kind of clicked,
Yeah.
and I started taking some notes, and that world came rushing back to me.
Yeah.
Everything I'd known, all the kids. And so I started writing about that, and it immediately felt like I'd finally found like what I needed to be writing about.
It's so funny because I've talked about this with a few other writers, and specifically about place, about
Mhm.
writing about where you're from, and a couple other writers. I talked to Kyle Winkler sort of recently, who's another Indiana author, like I am, and I had mentioned in that interview that I had so often fought myself with writing about Indiana because I thought it wasn't creative enough. I think I
Mhm.
phrased it a little differently in the interview, but I'm so curious now about you saying you had never thought about, because I read the essay that you published in the Paris Review, which is a fantastic essay. I'm going to link it and make sure everyone gets it. I think it's an amazing companion piece to your book because it really helps dive into, I think, the emotional and mental journey you went on to get to writing Hope House. And in that, you talk about writing a story and your teacher being like, "You need to read this to the class," and
Yeah.
then having her read it because you didn't want to, but then having read another story that you wrote. And one of my questions was like, do you feel like you had been writing this book kind of in the back of your mind forever?
Right. That's a great question. I actually forgot as I was just giving that previous answer, I forgot that I'd written
Yeah.
that story when I was like in eighth grade. And yeah, because I'd written a story about a kid
Yeah.
in eighth grade. And, you know, I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and it was like the idea of being a writer was not
Yeah.
encouraged at all. I had people who cared about books, teachers and stuff who were great teachers, but I was going to run a boys' home like my dad was my future.
Yeah.
It wasn't something I really wanted to do, but it was just like the family hand me down kind of thing. And I think I was always around these kids. I was always collecting the stories. I was on the van. I sat in on group counseling. I heard things that the staff didn't hear because I was young,
You
and
were
I was
them. Yeah. They
yeah
saw
I,
you as them.
yeah I was really quiet, so they would either forget I was there or they would think I wasn't processing what they said,
Yeah.
and I was just always around, so they got used to me.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I was always writing the story, but I was always reporting it. I was
Hmm.
always gathering the information. And I think that's probably why it was there when I turned back to it. All the material was there.
Yeah. I'm curious also why, and I think I maybe know the answer a little bit, but I just am desperate to hear why, like how your head worked around it, why it's a novel, like why that's where your head went
Right.
instead of, because you, like you just said, you were reporting it for all those years,
Mhm.
and the natural process of reporting is to lead to nonfiction. Or it seems, it feels, as I was reading it, very close to like uh creative nonfiction, while
Mm.
at the same time, but like it's a novel. So I'm
Right.
curious about that. Like, did you ever think I'll write this as nonfiction, or was it always a novel to you?
Yeah, it was always a novel because I think the voice that came to me immediately, like the narrator, AWOL's voice, I didn't know who it was, but that voice to me was really the first thing I found. I mean,
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to write about these different kids, but I realized the narrator's in this home, and he's going to tell this story. And also, I mean, it was always fiction. The characters I have, they're based on the kids I knew. None of them are like thinly veiled versions of an exact kid, though. You
Yeah.
know, so I really needed the freedom of fiction to bring these kids together. There's, obviously there's a lot of characters in this book. It's a group of teenagers, but to timeline wise to bring their moments together, I really needed fiction to kind of condense all of that, and also to be able to get to like the deeper truths. Like I think it was Faulkner who said that fiction was good fiction was truer than any nonfiction,
Yeah.
and to have the freedom to imagine moments to get those on the page. I needed fiction to do that.
What was that process like of finding AWOL's voice over the, because you said you wrote it for 6 years? Is that how long you wrote it
Yeah, I think the
total?
first story I probably started drafting in 2018, and then there's breaks in the process where
Yeah.
it's off for editing and this and that. But yeah, fine. His voice, like the way he spoke, came just right out of the gate. But I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know his story. His story, he was the voice came easily, but figuring out like who he
Hmm.
was difficult.
So did you figure it out through drafting? Did you do character studies? Did you write notes? Like, how did you work your way into it? Was it just through drafting the novel?
Yeah, and pressure from the people who work with you on the book, my
Yeah.
my agent and editors, and they this is how books get better, in my opinion, just at least the one I wrote, as they go through the process, because you have voices sort of putting pressure, saying we need more of his story, we need to know more of him, and which is hard when you're telling all these different stories about these different kids, and he's telling it, but there's also kind of there's kind of a plural
Yeah.
happening in the book. um I talked with my dad about it, who's still around. I was like, who do you think this kid is? And he would say, oh, it's this. He would name all of his old boys. He would be
Yeah.
certain, oh, it's this kid, it's Antonio, it's this kid, it's this kid. And after a while, I came to believe what I saw in that voice, what I heard was more like me, like a
Yeah.
version of me, is what it felt like over time. Not that I was
Interesting.
one of the boys, but that I
Yeah.
was that connected to the home, and that I was the one who was always there for all the years.
Yeah. Well, reading the book and reading Paris Review, your essay in the Paris Review, that is an interesting wrinkle, that you were kind of one of the boys who was living in the home with the boys.
Yeah, or at least I was around them. I was AWOL's the one who just he's this constant presence.
Yeah.
And I had a different life than the boys because I got to go home at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and I lived out in the community. I kind of had one foot in the home, but the voice and the AWOL is searching for a family in the
Yeah.
book, and our family was so inextricable from the home because my dad was his work was his life.
Yeah.
And I think it came from that.
So, sort of touching back on the pressure from the people that you're working with, because I think listeners will really like to dive into that, and having an editor or a publisher or whomever, an agent, push you and say you're not doing enough, or however they would phrase it. I'm first, I want to know if you felt like, or when in the process, because I have a guess that you felt like you were saying enough and that it just wasn't landing in the way they thought it was. Or talk to me about if you had disconnects that you had to sort of work through, because I haven't really gotten to dive into that, like the nitty gritty of the editing process with any writers yet. And for a debut novelist, that's going to be pretty fresh in your mind. So talk to me about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I had the first story that ran, and then I already had notes on all these characters. Like I could feel their stories coming together.
Yeah.
And I did not write in order. So I would write this kid's story and then that kid's story. And then I had to figure out how to get them all together because it wasn't going to be a short story collection, which is more difficult to publish. And that was the other big push that was, we need some kind of central narrative here.
Yeah.
Is the feedback that I would have. Not that plot is a big part of this book, but there was, consistent feedback that we need something to hold this together to propel us forward.
Right.
And I think that because I was jumping around a lot, that was difficult.
Yeah.
And I probably, when I first turned in like a full manuscript, it was by that point to what the book became, I probably cut 50,000 words.
Oh, dang.
I cut a bunch of the characters that I really liked. Kids,
Yeah.
I felt like I was kicking some of the kids out.
Yeah.
But the book, I think it made the book better because it got tighter and it was painful. But you get like the comments, you get the feedback, and then you process it, and then you understand what they're telling you, and you go back and you realize, okay, I can live without this character. There's a dog in the book. I cut the dog out, which I love the dog because we had a dog at the home, one of the homes I grew up around. We had a dog named Bingo, and he would sit by the back door. And if you came into the home, he'd try to shake your hand with his little paw, And so he was such a fixture in real life. And it was like, okay, we got to lose the dog. And he was the one I'm like, no. I cut the dog and then I put the dog back in. I could not lose the dog, not Bingo. Yeah. Unfortunately, I could cut some of the kids, but not Bingo.
That's, a lot of emotional resonance with dogs. For sure. Even if they're just words, they stick with this. That's super interesting. 50,000 words. So did you save those words? Are they in a file?
Yeah, I have every draft of everything I wrote, and I have kids I never turned in. I have chapters that I never showed anybody. I have all that stuff, and some of it I really loved, but when I was trying to get the whole book to fit together, it just didn't fit with it.
Yeah, that having to ask yourself, and this was a question that I learned the hard way after writing stuff that didn't work. Having to ask yourself, do I love this? And then the next question is, but is it a story?
Yeah, right.
Does it work as a story? And gosh, that's hard sometimes, because the answer sometimes is, yes, I do love this, but it's not really a story. It doesn't have the through line that makes it a story.
For sure. And also it's, what does this do? If this is in there, what does it do to the rest of the material?
Right.
It spins me off in directions I can't go in.
Right. Yeah. It's hard. And cutting 50,000 words is, that's a tough, that's a tough pill, but like you said, made the book better.
Yeah. And honestly, at that point, the book was kind of a mess. So it needed a big cut.
So for going forward, are you going to write out of order again? Will you do it again that way?
I don't know. I think that happened organically because I was trying to find the story. I was trying to find the kids and which kids I wanted to write about and which staff too. And so, and I just didn't know how they all fit together. So I've never been a writer who sits and plots things out. Like I've never done an
Yeah.
outline. I've never done anything like that. It's all just kind of feel. And so I just kind of wrote it and went
Yeah.
from there. Maybe it would have been better to plot it out a little bit more or something. I don't know. I can't do it that way.
Yeah, that's tough. I can't really either. I can't remember if I've mentioned this in past episodes. Stephen King famously has the like pantser plotter. I don't know if he's the one who came up with it, but he talks about how he plotted one novel, and I think it's called Insomnia,
Mhm.
and it's a bad book.
Right.
like it's not good. And
Right.
he
Just less. Yeah.
says that as well. He's like, you can tell that it's the only one that I
Mhm.
sat down and plotted, and
Mhm.
if your brain ain't the kind of brain
Yeah.
that does the plotting,
It's,
forcing it to do it is a bad idea, probably.
yeah. Just be a bad plot. Some people can, they can work that way, but some of us can't. So.
Yeah, I tend to not be able to. I take a lot of notes
Mhm.
and write a little like chunks of things every once in a while, but generally if I'm sitting down to write, it is like straight into a draft that ends up getting changed a lot
Right.
in the end. So, but
Right.
that's how it works. Your book opens with some pretty memorable visuals. There's one that I wanted to talk about as kind of a almost like a metaphorical thematic
Mhm.
through line of, I won't say exactly everything, but it opens with a character who tells a story about having to go back into the fire.
Mhm.
And it's a very literal story that he's telling, but I really thought that summed up a lot of the themes that your book was dealing with. And then also hearing you talk about it and reading the essay in the Paris Review, I really felt like that touched on a lot of how this work seems to me. And I want to know how hard this was emotionally, if it was hard for you emotionally. And this sort of relates to a thing that we were just talking about, which I'll get to after you answer this. But like, did you have a difficult time emotionally with some of this stuff revisiting it?
Um, uh, Honestly, I didn't.
No?
But I'll tell you who did.
Yeah.
It was my dad because he worked with kids for 40, 45 years. And a lot of this was his story.
Yeah.
Um, my counselor in the book, Mr. Watts, is loosely based on when my dad was a very young
Yeah.
uh, group home counselor and became the director. And so I would send my dad a chapter at a time. I remember the first chapter I sent him, I didn't hear anything back.
Yeah.
Like, uh-oh, not good. So I called my mom and I'm like, what's going on? And she said, your dad's back in the bedroom crying,
Oh,
but I think he loves the book and
yeah.
he worked with me through edits. He would tell me, this part doesn't work, like, because like with the character Karvel Macklemore, who's a really sophisticated kid and clashes with Mr. Watts. And my dad read that chapter and was like, no, you'd never win a kid like that over in your timeline. He was like, you're
Yeah.
going to have to make that take longer. It never happened like that in real life. It's got to take longer. But he went through some of the things that happen in the book with homes closing
Yeah.
for me, it was difficult to share those parts because he kind of lived some of that.
Yeah.
For me, I loved writing about the kids because I loved growing up around them. Some of them had the real life part of it was difficult. Like we would have kids go home. Like
Yeah.
I mentioned in the Paris Review interview, we had a kid we all loved go home and get shot and get killed.
Yeah.
Um, and there were times when it just felt like they slipped through your fingers. When I was in college, by the time I was in college, I worked at one of the homes in summers, and in high school, I worked nights at the homes. So as I got older, my relationship with the kids would change and I would understand it from a more mature perspective, the things they'd been through.
Yeah.
And so when you lost kids like that, it was difficult. But to go back and write about it, for me, it was just was sort of determined to get their full complexity on the page. You
Yeah.
know, I didn't see our kids as innocent. I didn't see them strictly as victims or strictly as juvenile delinquents.
Yeah.
They were complicated kids, and writing about it to me was just a way to make sense of what I'd grown up around. I
Yeah.
think it was a lot harder for my dad than it was me.
When you touch on the complicated nature of it too, with one kid, and again, I think this is from the Paris Review. I keep mentioning because it's a fantastic piece. I really do think it's a great companion piece to the book. Um, a kid saying, "My mom doesn't want me to sell drugs, but she takes the money,"
Yep.
and that's a hard, that's a hard thing to confront,
Yeah.
especially for a kid. But even now, like, I don't know how to even get my head around the things that are involved with like squaring that circle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
See, I heard that kid say that. That's one of those lines in the book that I heard in real life,
yeah,
and none of us had an answer for.
yeah,
And
that's
I
that's
love
hard.
that kid. That kid was so sharp. And he was that's when I was older. When I was
Yeah,
in college, I heard a kid say that. And I took that kid home on a home visit one time, and met his grandmother, who was great and loved him. And but if you saw where the kid came from and you saw what he was walking into when we were sending him home, you would know, you would understand why he got into the things he got into.
yeah,
He was an
yeah.
awesome kid.
So that you mentioned it already, kind of about being quiet, about being a quiet kid.
Mhm.
And do you think this is a weird thing for you to have like fallen in love with for someone who's quiet, or do you think it's pretty natural to be like, I'm going to be alone for a while and write this thing as a quiet? Because are you still quiet, or do you think you've shifted? Or
Yeah, I'm a quiet person for sure. I'm like the parent at the baseball games who kind of stands off on the side, and I'm happy. I'll talk. I'm outgoing if you come over and talk to me.
yeah,
But it's all situational. I'm pretty comfortable talking about this book, for instance.
yeah,
I'm not too quiet about that. It just depends what the subject is. But I think being quiet, I love, you know, the idea of introversion being an asset, that you can really observe the world, and
yeah,
you notice things. If you're not always super outgoing, you notice things maybe that other people don't.
yeah. And so I guess paired up with that question, the college experience leading up to you writing this book, I would love to know about ways in which college maybe helped shape your writing, and if you think being a quiet person in a college setting maybe even played a special role in the development of you as a writer, or is that me just connecting two things that have nothing to do with each other?
No, I actually loved college. At that point when I first started, when I went to school, I was going to be a psychology major because
Yeah,
I was. I mean, I have a degree in psychology because I was going to run a boys' home,
yeah,
and I didn't have like the notion of breaking off and doing my own thing. I mean, it was hilariously late. I mean, it was probably, I remember being like, I'd already had a degree, and I remember going to the public library, and I went to Kentucky, and a public library in Lexington, and I had just started to really read literature, like
yeah,
really like get into it, and seeing all the short story collections on the shelf, and just being like, oh my God, like I was so into it all of a sudden. What happened was one of the homes I was going to work out closed, and so it was had to find a different. I was so tired of them closing, and there was no way I really wanted to do that.
yeah,
And I had started writing, and I took a literature class at a junior college, and because it cost less than the major thing going at the actual University of Kentucky. And in the literature class, we just read a bunch of different short stories and stuff. And I became kind of fascinated with all of it.
yeah.
But I felt like I did that so much later than everyone else. I
Well,
always felt like I was behind, you know?
that's funny. So when you said that, I was like, I wonder what hilariously late means to him, because you were probably what, like 26?
Well, yeah, I had a degree. So I was 22, 23, and started taking the first English classes. But I felt like, because I wasn't in high school, I didn't take what we called the smart kid classes. I
Right.
didn't. I was in baseball conditioning, instead of the good classes. But my girlfriend at the time, who still is my wife now, she
Yeah.
took the smart classes, and she was like, "You should be in the smart classes." Well, like, what are you doing? But she was the one who said you should take some literature classes. You should do this. Because I had not taken AP English and all of these courses, I felt like everyone was just constantly ahead of me. I felt like that all through college, and it was actually great because I then worked really hard,
Push yourself.
and it was a great place to work from, to feel like you're behind and everyone around you smarter than you, and everyone's read more books, and a lot of them had, and a lot of them were smarter than me. And I did, and this was not at Harvard, by the way. Like I
Yeah.
said, I went to a public university, but I found professors who cared about books, who cared about writing. I had a great literature teacher in college, Tom Marksberry, who taught American Lit and introduced me to a bunch of great writers, and Kim Edwards, who wrote The Memory Keeper's Daughter. She taught a fiction writing workshop. Eric Reese, who writes essays and books and creative nonfiction. They love books, and so that kind of rubbed off on me. It was I loved college in that time. Big
Yeah.
influence.
Do you think now that it's funny that you thought you were behind, or do you still think, because this is one thing we talk about a lot on the show, is comparing ourselves to other people,
Mhm.
which not a revelatory topic, but it is obviously one that everyone kind of has a engagement with.
Sure.
Do you think, I mean, you said, I think you do think that it was helpful to feel that way, but
Mhm.
I'm curious what your view is now of like the idea of being late to a
Yeah.
thing, especially in your like early 20s, like
Right.
you're late somehow, which I know what you mean, because I felt that way for a while, and
Mhm.
I don't feel that way now, or I guess maybe I struggle with it still now, if I'm going to be honest, because this morning I saw an interview with a writer director who's 23, and
Mhm.
I was telling my friend I felt this sort of like little pang of envy and kind of sadness, but then I realized all of the tools that this person who made a movie that I really liked, all of the tools that exist for he and his friends to do the things
Mhm.
20 years ago when I was in my early 20s,
Oh yeah. Right.
none of those things existed.
Right. Different
So
world.
I'm just so curious about how you feel now about the idea of like you were late.
Yeah. I always felt like an outsider. Like I was always outside of publishing, writing, and the being late part of it. I think that was really hard in my later 20s, early 30s, because I didn't feel like I was ever going to be in. And then honestly, this goes back to being a dad, and it just shifted my focus. I thought when I had a kid that was probably it, that I wouldn't have time to write anymore. And I heard people say this, and it became true for me. You just become more efficient.
Yeah.
And that's when I really started getting stuff published, is when I wrote mornings and I wrote nights, and gained a little momentum. And also because I was so consumed with real life, I just cared less whether I was inside or outside. And I think I found my people.
Hmm.
I love, like, the people I've worked with on this book at Hub City are really cool. My agent has helped me so much. And I just don't, I feel like I've lived enough life now that I don't compare myself to other people. I always felt anyway that I'd lived kind of a different life growing up around the boys and stuff like that. And I just felt like I've told the story that I wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like, I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think about this a lot, and I try to remind myself all the time, like the writing is the thing.
Hmm.
It's not the comparison or whatever the writing ends up doing. Like, obviously, it's for me anyway. This is helpful for me to not think of like the book as the thing,
Right.
like think of the process of it as the thing, and that's really hard. And I don't even know if that's helpful or the right way to think about it, but that's how I do it with myself, at least now that I'm older and not doing those same things, being like, oh, I'm so late.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. I remember emailing back when, I'd mentioned Kim Edwards. So she
Mm,
wrote Memory Keeper's Daughter. And it was I was in her class before the book was coming out. And then all of a sudden it was everywhere.
yeah.
It was number one on Amazon, like the number one book on all of Amazon. It was international bestseller, everything, New York Times bestseller. It was crazy. And I remember her emailing and I had congratulated her and she was, she was grateful, but she also was like, it's really about the writing though. Like, and she was honest. This was a person who had written a book that sold a gazillion copies. And she
Yeah.
like, she was really being totally truthful. She was like, it's the process. That's what's rewarding. And I think that's true. If you can sell that many books and have that many readers and really still see it that way, then it can be true.
Yeah, I mean, that's my hope if I ever ended up in that amazing situation, because that's a good situation to be in. But also I think, like you were saying, like telling the story of the boys and of your life around the boys and through this novel, and not caring about the thing, whatever the thing
Mhm.
is, like social media or people accolades and stuff like that, and focusing, and it gets harder and harder because of the way the world is. But that's where I think being quiet probably did help you, at least from my perspective, because I'm not a quiet person, as you can imagine, as someone who started a podcast. But I think that I try to dip in and out of that personality, especially for writing days. But I feel like that probably helped you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, um, we all are kind of part of a big ecosystem, but you find your role in it. You find what you really want to do inside of it, and you can't. I mean, all of the what everyone else is doing really is a distraction.
Yeah.
So you find like again, I finally figured out the story that I needed to tell, and I think it was Flannery O'Connor who said anyone who survived childhood has enough material, and you got to find what you really need to be writing about.
Yeah. Do you think you had a process for that, or was it kind of running all the time? That the process of finding those things, was it just living?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a factors coming together. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's like an active search for people. Maybe if I had more actively searched, I would have figured it out sooner.
Yeah.
Would have saved myself a decade. But it just, it wasn't. I had a child, and I think I've mentioned this in another interview, but we were in Atlanta,
Yeah.
and I know every playground in Atlanta, and I would take him to these playgrounds, and I didn't have time to write anything but like poems. And so I
Yeah.
would just write lines about different kids I knew. And then that was really even before the first story, writing poems and just lines about kids I knew. And that came from time constraints. It came from just life. Everything forced that particular shape at that particular time. That having a son was forced. The idea, the thought of being a father and taking care of kids and kids not having a father, all of that was, it came together like in that way.
And also, if you had saved yourself that decade, there's no way to know what book would have, like, it wouldn't have been
Right.
this book. It would have been
Yeah.
completely
No,
different.
I didn't have the chops to do it 10 years earlier. I mean, I just didn't. Like I said, I was behind. It took a long time for me to send out stories to. I mean, even though I was getting tons of rejections,
Yeah.
I was learning. It's hard to learn when you don't get any real feedback.
Yeah.
I felt like I was just alone in a void without any feedback, and I just had to figure out my mistakes on my own.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there are ways that I don't recommend people operate in a void like I did. I think there are ways to speed up your process, and
Yeah.
it comes from feedback from other people. But for the time that I was working and the life I was living, that was kind of how it went.
So when you say you didn't have the chops, do you think the big thing that helped you was the feedback, like getting actual like sort of boots on the ground, so to speak? I don't like the phrase, but actual feedback on the story themselves, not just this isn't right for us or
Mhm.
thanks for submitting, but like someone being like, here's the reason why these paragraphs don't work and here's why your character arcs aren't working. Like, is that where you realized that, to use your phrase, you didn't have the chops?
I think that the feedback was enormous, but I'll tell you what was even bigger than that
Yeah.
was having people believe in you.
Yeah.
Like outside people actually say, like when I wrote the story, Damico, and the Masters Review published it, and it won their like reward for new writers. I forgot exactly what it was called, but then to hear from outside people like agents, like the agent that I ended up signing with, that enthusiasm, that like belief in you, and it be genuine and not someone just blowing smoke. Like to have a few people really believe in you
Yeah.
was more important than the future feedback they gave me.
Yeah.
Because in your head, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, I can do this.
Hmm.
I can do this. And yeah, that to me was that preceded the feedback, but it was the thing that got me really believing. All right, I can write a novel. I can
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. That's super interesting because I feel like we have to struggle with figuring out when to like select the
Mhm,
feedback that we're going to be like, all right, this is the feedback that I am going to allow in to
mhm.
change me, and all of this other stuff I'm going to let bounce off. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Oh, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And it's the belief is really important because if and it be genuine.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have these people who are going to work with you on your book, and they really believe in the project, and they love it, and they love the voice that you've got and everything. If if you're good with that, you and it's real, then you can go through all the feedback, all the edits, the suggestions, the cutting of the material and stuff because you're in a partnership now,
Right.
and and also you can stand your ground on certain things. Like I'm not, the dog is going
The
back in,
dog
but
stays.
back in.
Stays.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's important too. Yeah, but Stephen King has a thing about it, about talking about someone who believes in you, that
Mhm,
you can make speeches, but you don't have to make speeches. Just the belief is enough,
mhm,
and have it to be true. And he also talks about a writer with a partner, and if he
mhm,
sees someone who dedicates a novel to a husband or a wife or a partner, that's someone who understands and who
mhm,
gets it, because you're not as lonely as you think you are
mhm.
when you're doing those things. So those things are super important as well.
Absolutely. And I would say to people that if you're writing and you're really putting in the work, you got to get to the place where you find that.
Yeah,
And like, I don't want to tell people to writing is really hard.
it's hard.
Okay. So, but I don't want to tell people quit or keep going or anything. I would suggest until you get to over that hump to where you have the people believing or the feedback, then that's kind of the point that you really need to get to before you decide I want to stick with this or not.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Wonder Boys, one of my favorite Michael Chabon novels. I can't. I think it's from in the book and in the film, where Grady Tripp, the teacher, he's a writing teacher, is talking about you can't tell a writer to quit or to not quit, because they're going to do whatever. Like you just help them. You don't tell them if they have it or if they don't have it, because they're going to be the ones who have to do the thing. So just give them what you can, and then they'll make the decision if they're going to keep going or if they're going to quit. And if they choose one or the other, it's fine. It's not a failure.
Right. Yeah. And that's awesome. That's a great quote. And it reminds me of what Ken Harif said, which I love. Ken Harif. He's like
Yeah.
one of my favorites. And he'd said he wrote an essay in Granta years ago and said that you have to believe in yourself despite the evidence.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, and which is totally true. It was, to me, that was like a guiding, that you do have to believe in yourself, and but then you also had to get to the point where you have other people believe in you.
Yeah. Yeah. That very, very important to have the other people. And for, like you said, for it to be honest and true. Another thing we talk about a lot here. Do you write every day?
I do. And I did all through this book. I
Yeah.
wrote mornings before I would get my son up. I wrote nights. I remember writing. My wife took my son when he was like 1 or 2 to the bathroom. We were at the Cheesecake Factory, and I remember writing. We're taking notes real fast on my phone because I was just really into a
Yeah.
chapter, and I think that chapter got cut. But yeah, I would all the time,
Yeah.
whenever I could. Now in the mornings, but I was so it was not super like effortful. It wasn't like I got to
Yeah.
sit down, and I've had those years where it's like I got to sit down and put in a couple of hours. With this book, it was more like I have an opening now. I can.
Yeah.
I felt very pulled in and compelled to do it.
Was a lot of that on the phone, or were you writing? Do you do longhand, keyboard? What's your
I
setup?
just on the computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just work on a laptop. I write nothing longhand. I guess I did when I was little, but
Yeah.
now I'm just on the computer. I don't, put everything on sleep mode, and I listen to white noise or whatever, and I don't check emails or anything. I just sit there as long as I can, try to stay in that world as long as I can.
Yeah. How long does it usually last?
Usually about 3 hours is
Mm-hmm.
the most I could sit in one setting before I like get up and go make some toast or something.
That's
And
mine too. 3 hours is my limit.
yeah, 3 hours is great, but also it's a blessing to have 3 hours to sit
Yeah.
there. Not
Yeah.
everybody has that. When at different points in my life, it's like 1 hour in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and then for a lot of this book, it was okay after parenting mode's done, I got an hour at night, and you're exhausted, but it's like, this is my hour.
Yeah.
So I got to do it.
You've already answered this sort of for your life now after you had a kid, but I'm curious about prior, if you felt like writing was a thing that you did, or if writing was your life. Like,
Right.
I'm always curious about the ways in which we like define where people are like, what do you do? Or
Mhm.
so I'm curious, and I want to ask as many writers as I can, like if you felt like writing was a thing that just existed inside your life, or if it was your life.
Yeah, but that's a really tough one. I felt like it was such an orienting factor. It probably like what you think about when you get up in the morning. That's the way it was for me. And yeah, and I'm trying to think about how that changed now. I don't think that right now it is like
Yeah.
I think being a dad is like is the thing I do.
Yeah.
I think before writing would be, although it was like a secret, because if you're not writing books and stuff, you can't, like, I would be very, like, I wouldn't tell people I'm a writer. I remember
Yeah.
thinking in my head, if I can get a few more stories published, then I'm going to start telling people the truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them, but I don't tell people I'm a writer because I don't, yeah, I don't know that I'll want to have that conversation. What do you write about?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh yeah.
you know,
I have an idea.
yeah,
You should write it.
I've got a novel in my trunk. Would you like to read it? I'm like,
Yeah.
"Ugh."
See,
But
that sounds to me like the difference between a quiet guy and the not quiet guy. Because I'm like, oh, I'm a writer. I got a podcast. Come on my
right.
podcast.
But see, when I do actually connect with other people who are writers, and I feel a real kindred spirit there. I do,
Yeah.
because I feel like, okay, they've sat there with the words, and it's like a really hard gig, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of us too, which scares me sometimes, how many people are out there and are really trying, and there's talent, and it scares me sometimes how many of us there are.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. But I also really try to embrace the idea that it's not competition,
No.
and like that book's not going to mean my book doesn't come out, even if there's all these examples of people being like I talked about in my last interview, like we already have a robot book, Austin. We don't need
Right.
your robot book. I'm like, I have to get into my head like that's just one place.
Right.
There's all these other places.
Right.
But I think also, like you said, the kindred spirit nature of it,
Mm-hmm.
people who get it. And I talk about this a lot at the writers group that I run or like on podcasts and stuff. There's nothing easier than not writing. So it's the easiest thing. Like we're doing it right now. I'm going to do it
Yeah.
after I get up and walk here. I'm going to not be writing. There's
Right.
nothing easier in the world. So if you want to do this,
Right.
you can.
Oh yeah, and it's also with like, okay, well now I have a book published. There's less push, there's less pressure. Like I'm working on something else, but I don't for that first book. That's like, I just feel like I felt like it was a sprint and a marathon,
Yeah.
you know. And now I kind of feel like I have something, but I would like to get back to work, like I
Yeah.
would like to get that energy, that feeling of all that momentum behind you is like, that's a good feeling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And not knowing where a thing's going at the same time, we're like sort of suspecting that you know where it's going. Like, oh God, that feeling is,
Yes.
man, it's good. It's
Yep.
so good. Do you still write poetry?
No, I
No.
mean, not really, because I'm not any good at it.
That shouldn't stop you.
Yeah. Um, I think I always have, it depends what I'm reading. Like if I'm
Yeah.
reading poems, then I want to write them. But then I look at them and I'm like, that's fine as long as I don't show them to
Yeah.
anyone.
This is for me.
Uh,
This is a me poem.
this one's for the private file. I love poetry, but it was one of those things I don't think I seriously read like a poetry collection until I was like 30 something, probably, honestly.
Yeah.
But then loved it and found poets that I loved. And I think it made my writing a lot better. I think the images and poetry and how it quiets your mind and focuses you. It's when I'm reading poetry like regularly, I just feel like I'm more connected to the world. I see things better, hear
Me
things
too.
better.
I think I had an English teacher in high school. I had a few English teachers in high school who did some pretty great things for me. And one of them, it's probably a little cliche now, but I don't care. She showed us Dead Poet Society,
Okay.
and it really legitimately changed me. And I bought a copy of Leaves of Grass after that. And after that, and I dove into Walt Whitman, and
Wow.
I was kind of an asshole about poetry for a while in my younger years, where I was like, "Oh, I don't get it. It's stupid. And you just write whatever you want. It's poetry."
Right.
And luckily, I grew out of that.
Yes. So my wife, I told you she was in the smart classes. So
Yeah,
they watch Dead Poets Society too. So were you in the smart classes?
I was in the smart classes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
Yes, we did not watch Dead Poets Society in my class. Okay.
well, I've noted for listeners, I wasn't in, or I was in the quote unquote smart classes, and I don't have a novel published. And here
Okay.
you are as a debut novelist. So
Good.
there you go.
All
Doesn't
right.
matter.
Works out okay.
But yeah, so poetry, it really did change me. And the more I embraced it, like I bought, again, maybe somewhat cliche, the complete collection of Jim Harrison's poems.
Oh,
And
awesome.
holy smokes, like
Yeah.
that one is next to my bed. And I try to
Yep.
read at least one or two every night. And I'll save some on my phone just to kind of dip in and out of. And I have a lot of collections now that I bought one called Mothman Apologia.
Okay.
And it is so weird. Such a strange collection. Robert Wood Lynn.
Okay.
And their poems about Mothman. He's like, Mothman cancels his internet service. But they're just so
Yeah.
unique. And I fell in love with it. And
Mhm.
it was one of those things where it was like, this poetry feels like poetry that is saying to Austin, poetry is not what you used to think it was ever.
Right.
And it can be anything. So when you mentioned it, I knew I wanted to dive into it because it really, and I've talked to writers recently that I know here in town about how good it is at helping you with your prose and vivid
For
imagery
sure.
and stuff like that. So
Sure. Yeah.
So you do write every day. I'm jealous of that, by the way, because I can't do it in my head, but I always want to. And I try not to beat myself up about it if I don't write for
Well,
the day.
it won't help to. But also you do like I would always feel especially while working on this book, like if I couldn't put in like a full day or make some kind of headway, it would kind of ruin my day. It was like the thing that I had to have. It was my baseline that I had to be at for the
Yeah.
rest of the day to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It doesn't help to beat yourself up, just to embrace it and be like, that's fine. I didn't get to write for the day. Like I'll get to it tomorrow. It's
Unless it
gonna be,
doesn't help, unless beating yourself up is the thing that makes you find a way to do it.
yes. Yeah. For every individual out there. For me, it doesn't. So I try to avoid it.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious how your head works as far as like finding stories, like not where the ideas come from. No one knows. It's impossible to know. But like now, did you already have a thing kind of like backburnered after you had Hope House, or how, I guess, how obsessed were you with this novel? Like, did it crowd out everything, and now that it's out, it's like whoosh, all the rest of the stuff is hitting you again? Or how's your story brain working now?
Well, I don't know how it works for everyone else, but with me, the process was there were just openings that I had to work on something else because the manuscript was out and waiting on edits, waiting on to be to be bought. There was just different moments where I had time to start something else. So I started another book and would write for it for a while, and then I would have to go back and revise the main Hope House again.
Yeah.
And the feeling would always be, I don't know if I can go back into that world and then instantly, as soon as you start working on it, you're back in. And it's not my favorite way to jump back and forth, but because it obviously slows down the process on the next book. But once I think that same feeling with Hope House when I figured out, oh, like you just know, like this is what I'm working on. This makes sense. This is it. I think now that I've had that feeling, I can feel that again.
Well, it's a super emotional book, lovely, which is it's a weird word to put to it, but I do find loveliness in it, and I like your voice a lot, and it absolutely lines up with a lot of the stuff that I am pretty intensely interested in, reading wise. So I absolutely recommend everybody grab it. Where can everybody find you online?
I'm at joebondwriter.com is my website that I just put up because I felt I had to, or people can go there. I have an Instagram account that I started because, that's part of, but which is cool because like other writers I've kind of connected with some people, which is nice, but also I think all of us are probably on there because we're compelled to be on there.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't really spend much time on social media or anything like that. That's another, you become more efficient when you have kids, and that's an inefficiency.
Less time for the social media. So the book is out today, May 26th, 2026. So whenever you are listening to this, the book is out from Hub City Press. Go get it. Thank you so much for coming on, Joe. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for the questions. I really appreciate it.
Hope House is out from Hub City Press today, the day I'm recording this outro, May 26, 2026. So if you're listening to this after that, what's stopping you? Go grab the book. You can get it on bookshop.org. I have an affiliate link through the show notes where you can support the show if you purchase it through there, through Mossart Books, my independent bookstore. But you can also buy it anywhere else if you don't want to go through there. Yeah, check out joebondwriter.com. That's his website. You can see more of his work there. He is on Instagram and those places, so check that stuff out as well if you'd like. And as always, follow me on Substack, on Instagram, my website, austinrwilson.com. Like and subscribe to the show and share it with everyone, all those things. And watch out for the next interview, which, yes, I am recording in 2 days, so it should be up. It might be up in May. It might be early April. I guess it'll depend on the rest of this week as I am continuing with writing, yes, but also I'm in school now doing some IT/cybersecurity school stuff because I'm leaving marketing behind because it sucks. Anyway, come back for more writing talk. I'll see you later.